having laid the groundwork with a flood of salacious, jaw-dropping testimony about a sordid conspiracy to suppress negative stories about Donald Trump ahead of the 2016 presidential election. Prosecutors in the Trump election interference hush money trial today have turned to the core of the actual crimes, the actual criminal acts and criminal charges against the ex-president. That scheme to cover up hush money payments to porn star Stormy Daniels using falsified business records. On the stand right now, Trump Org employee Deborah Tarasoff. She handled payroll for the ex-president's business, and her testimony is critical. She explains that only Donald Trump could sign checks that came from his personal account. That's the one that was used to reimburse Michael Cohen for those hush money payments. Trump did that even after becoming president of the United States of America. She also testified that if Trump did not want to sign a check, he didn't have to. She was one half of a double whammy against the ex-president today, testifying after Trump Org controller Jeffrey McConney. McConney was the first witness to actually also have been a co-defendant of the ex-president. That was back in the civil fraud case against Trump and the Trump Org. McConney testified that most of the money used to reimburse Michael Cohen came from Trump's personal account, 9 of the 11 payments made to him. In fact, McConney testified that why Cohen was actually reimbursed $420 was complicated, but not so much when you see it laid out. So it was the hush money payment plus a bonus plus what they refer to as plussing up, paying him additional money to cover the taxes that would be owed. McConney said that he told Deborah Tarasoff to record the payments as, quote, legal expenses. McConney went on to tell the jury that Trump was a micromanager. From NBC News is reporting in the courtroom, quote, McConney recalled that when Trump almost fired him early on into their working relationship, it was because McConney was simply paying Trump's bills without negotiating them. McConney said that Trump's cash balance had declined from one week to the next, prompting Trump to instruct McConney to not simply pay bills blindly, but to negotiate them at all times. It was, McConney said, quote, a teaching moment. Trump appeared to have laughed as the story was told, but that little anecdote, that little characterization of Trump could play an important role should Trump be convicted by this jury. It suggests that the invoices from Michael Cohen to pay off Stormy Daniels, the documents at the heart of this case, would not have been paid without Donald Trump's explicit knowledge. All of this happening after court began today with a stunning moment. Judge Juan Merchan finding the ex-president in contempt for violating his gag order again, and the judge threatening the ex-president with jail time. Judge Merchan saying this, quote, it appears that the $1,000 fines are not serving as a deterrent. The last thing I want to do is put you in jail. You are the former president of the United States and possibly the next president as well. There are many reasons why incarceration is truly a last resort for you. So as much as I do not want to impose a jail sanction, that I will, if necessary. 2 longtime Trump employees testifying about the details of the plan to conceal hush money payments. It's at the heart of the criminal case against the ex-president, and it's where we start today with some of our most favorite reporters and friends. NBC's Vaughn Hillyard outside the courthouse for us, plus former top official at the Department of Justice and MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissman's here. His co-author of the best-selling Trump indictments, the historic charging documents with commentary, Melissa Murray joins us here at the table as well. She's also an MSNBC contributor and an NYU law professor, and back here at the table, as she is every day, from the courthouse, New York Times investigative reporter Susanne Craig. Sue, I start with you and your notebook. Let's start with the testimony. We'll work our way back to the beginning of the day and the gag order. I mean, as someone who's so fluent and who teaches us all the time about how Trump ran afoul of the law in his financial dealings, tell us why the 2 witnesses today matter.
Well, they're really important because they establish the part of the crime here, which is the falsification of the entries there's 34 entries that are alleged to have been falsified. And today the jury saw them on the screen one by one. And it was Michael Cohen there was various invoices and entries that had been made into the books that were for legal fees that the prosecution is arguing that, in fact, they weren't for legal fees. They were for the hush money payments. And it was sort of one by one so that they could establish it and enter them into the record. And it's important because they don't have to show that Trump actually made the entries themselves, but that he caused someone like Cohen to do it, so that they had an agreement and that caused these false entries. So it was really important to get the tracks down on the entry of all of these the invoices.
I remember when you were on this show and Michael Cohen was a guest, and your question to him was about this plussing up. Explain why that's so significant.
Well, if it was just for legal fees, there should have been no grossing up on it, right?
It's just your retainer.
Yeah,
right?
So there was also documents shown today about the grossing up. And Alan Weisselberg and Jeff McConney, the two employees at the Trump Organization, had a discussion about that. And there was more than grossing up. There was a payment for something else, but it came to, I think where they run into trouble is the grossing up of the legal fees.
Vaughn, Hillyard, I understand that court is over for the day. It has ended. It's just after 4. That's a little bit earlier than I think we thought. These two witnesses are riveting to me because I have consumed all of Susanne Craig's, I think, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalism in this area. And to me, the moments that made me sort of gasp are the anecdotal information about what a tightwad Trump is and a micromanager he is. And in McConney, it came in the form of the story that we led with. But it also comes through in everybody detailing how, even if he was on the phone, he wanted to be involved in every dime of his money that was spent.
Right, in just how intrinsically involved each of these key players, including Alan Weisselberg, were to this. This wasn't just sort of like, all right, he's on our payroll. There are thousands of people on the payroll of the Trump Organization. There was a clear focus on how Michael Cohen was going to be reimbursed and what he technically was going to be reimbursed for, to the point that it was recorded into evidence here today in front of this jury that there were handwritten notes on bank statements and ledgers from Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer, as well as Jeffrey McConney, the controller for the Trump Organization, to the effect of how this was going to be executed in the math about how they were ultimately able to get to the sum of money that they were going to pay Michael Cohen over the course of the entire year. There was even discussed during this testimony by very individual, Deborah Tarasoff, who is in charge of executing these checks, that it took either Don Jr. or Eric or Donald Trump himself to sign off on a check that was more than $10,000. And she provided testimony that it was not uncommon for him, when a check was placed in front of him, to put void on the back of it and cross it out. So we have a situation here where two individuals, one who is a 35-year employee of the Trump Organization and another who is still an employee after 24 years of the Trump Organization, testifying as close allies of Donald Trump about the way in which Donald Trump was executing his financial records and the extent to which he was, through them potentially not, well, they did not say that they had the direct testimony that Donald Trump directed this. They are key players of part of what the district attorney's office has suggested to the jury as a conspiracy. And one other note, Nicolle, I can tell you is the fact that the jury for the first time today saw those actual checks. And I remember back in 2018 when those first checks to Michael Cohen were made public, just the way in which it became so crystal clear to the public at large that this is real. Donald Trump actually signed checks to Michael Cohen. And here in 2024, on May 6th, a jury today for the first time saw those very checks for themselves.
I remember that, too. I think they ended up on the front page of the New York Times, right?
They did, and they were right out of his account, the DJT Revocable Trust. I mean, that was very powerful today. They didn't come out of a corporate account. Most of them came out of his account and were signed by him. And we also heard the evidence that the checks were sent to the White House via FedEx for him to be signed. He signed them and then sent them back. So he knew full well the money was going out to Michael Cohen. The question becomes, can Donald Trump's lawyers convince the jury that was it for legal fees or was it not? And the argument was made today by Donald Trump's lawyers, but this was in fact for legal fees performed. And at one point,
Cohen didn't work there anymore, though, right?
He didn't. But they're arguing that he was doing legal services. But the interesting part I thought of the whole day was, Michael Cohen would send invoices in saying, per my retainer agreement, and nobody saw the retainer agreement. And at one point, Donald Trump's lawyers were arguing that it was a verbal retainer agreement, you know, sort of like he can magically declassify documents, that this was some sort of agreement that was just verbal. There is no written agreement. It really kind of started to fall apart as they were going into that territory, I thought.
What is the significance and the impact of the handwritten notes?
Well, again, I just like to sort of not push back, but to sort of elaborate what you were saying, Sue. These witnesses were meant to be handmaidens to the real stars of the show, which are these documents, which are supposed to tell the real story. And so the handwritten notes, the hand-signed checks, the invoices themselves tell a documentary story that gets pieced together with the local color that these witnesses provide. Like, so they're in the interstices really filling this out. Why are the handwritten notes so important? Again, to the point about him being a micromanager, that it's him and Michael Cohen who are having these communications. Everyone knows what's going on. Donald Trump is right in the middle of it. It's very much like the civil fraud trial, where you had Tish James showing how intimately involved he was in all of his businesses. And yet Donald Trump and his lawyers are saying it's a sweeping, massive enterprise and I'm really hands off. And so, and it's, again, you saw the same thing here on cross-examination with the lawyers, with Emil Bove saying, but, you know, he's really not the one doing this. You're taking your cues, Jeffrey McConney, from Alan Weisselberg. You're not getting direction from Donald Trump himself. So there's sort of a back and forth, a kind of minuet, if you will, between the prosecution and the defense, where they are showing he's so connected to this, and the defense is like, nope, they're at arm's length.